So, if you're knee-deep in the Persona fandom, you've probably seen the news about the domain registrations for Persona 4 Remake or a sly post by the game's lead singer floating around. Now, while neither of those actually mean we're getting Persona 4 Rewind anytime soon, it has punted Persona 4 to the forefront of my little ape brain, along with all my complicated feelings about it. If you actually read the title of this video, put away those pitchforks. I'm not saying Persona 4 never should have existed. I'm saying it would be better if it wasn't a Persona game. It would be better if it was Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country. What the actual heck am I talking about? Watch the video and you will find out. And bring back the pitchforks because yeah, I don't like Persona 4, and more damningly, I think it's a bad game. To start, one of the reasons my experience with this game was suboptimal at best was not Persona 4's fault. What is that reason? Spoilers. I was a Nintendo girly growing up, sort of assumed the Persona games would never get ported, and therefore totally didn't bother dodging any spoilers I saw online. While this didn't matter at all for Persona 5 and 3, Persona 4 is a murder mystery, and knowing who the killer was before I even picked up the game really sapped my enjoyment of the main plot. So, this is your warning. Do not be like me. This video is not spoiler-free, and is also written with the assumption that you are familiar with the game and don't need anything explained. So if you haven't played Persona 4 yet, close this and watch something else. Trust me. There will also be some spoilers from Persona 3 and Persona 5, specifically dialogue from the game's final bosses. However, I will be keeping their identities anonymous. Getting back on track, there are plenty of games and stories in general out there that are objectively good, which I just don't personally like due to taste. On the flip side, there are plenty of things that are hot garbage, but boy, I love eating them. I have a lot of subjective problems with Persona 4. I don't like the humour or the cast, but that doesn't inherently make them bad. It just makes them not for me, and that is fine. I am not a cishet mind gamer boy. Not everything has to be about me. But, as I said before, I do think Persona 4 is objectively kinda bad. Not garbage by any means, but I found the execution of it to be underwhelming. Why? Because the ludonarrative foundations of the game are rough. Let's first talk about the narrative part of that word, specifically the themes. While anyone who is drunken, the curtains are blue just because they are Kool-Aid is probably rolling their eyes right now. Sorry, but your brain has been rotted by anti-intellectualism. Themes are the backbone of all good stories. They're the thing that separates a fun but shallow piece of entertainment from an unforgettable masterpiece. Let's look at Persona 3. Its theme is death, in the tarot sense. In other words, loss or irreversible change. And also like death. The overarching story is ultimately about coping with the inevitability of loss. This loss, in one way or another, is the catalyst for every major character's arcs. To get back to the Ludo side of Ludo narrative, it's not just a story that revolves around this theme, but the gameplay. The calendar system that each of the modern Persona games use, it was created specifically for Persona 3 to show that time is finite, and you have to make the best of it. The Reaper, the modern Persona series bonus boss, can sometimes chase you throughout Tartarus to remind the player that death always lies in wait. Most of the non-party social links, especially in the FemC route, end with the person the link focuses on moving away or making another big life choice that takes them from the protagonist's side. There's more, but you get the point. Every facet of Persona 3 centers around and contributes to its theme. While Persona 5 isn't as strong thematically as Persona 3, the core theme of rebellion still informs both the narrative and gameplay. The social links often feature class solidarity, strong reds, whites, and blacks in a UI are associated with numerous revolutionary movements, And then there's the whole Phantom Thief thing compared to the flat-out heroics in Persona 3 and Persona 4. The problem with Persona 4 is not its theme, it's its themes, plural, because Persona 4 has 2 of them, to its vast detriment. ATLUS has stated that Persona 4's themes are along the lines of mystery and media literacy. Ultimately, I think Persona 4's first theme can be distilled down to truth. And, for 3/4 of the game, I think the game executes this theme fairly well. There's a murderer with supernatural methods on the loose, and therefore the investigation team are the only ones who can find the truth. The shadows the player characters must confront to get their personas reveal an awful truth about them. Well, they do initially, but more on that later, which they have to accept to move on. There's a lot of misleading gossip plaguing Inaba, aka a lack of the truth, and the police care more about solving the killings quickly than actually finding the true culprit, aka a lack of interest in the truth. The thing that stood out to me on my first playthrough until the endgame, however, were the social links. No matter how hard I tried to connect them to what I thought was the core theme of the game, truth, it just wasn't working. Because, as I eventually discovered, the social links aren't about the game's first theme, but its second one, community. And this is where Persona 4's overarching story completely lost me. The power of relationships is important in the other 2 modern Persona games. However, it is also a subset of the game's major themes. In Persona 3, relationships give life meaning, even if they are inherently fleeting. In Persona 5, true strength comes not from bowing to the whims of the masses, but fighting for the little guy, even if the whole world is against you. Now, if Persona 4's ultimate theme was that the truth can be awful, but you can weather it with the help of your friends, that would have been fine. Not necessarily well executed for reasons I'll go into later, but hey, it would have at least been a consistent message. Instead, the problem with how Persona 4 handles its theme of community is that it is completely disjointed from the prior theme of truth, and it comes out of nowhere during what is basically the end of the game. Yeah, there is literally no power of friendship stuff until, the second to last dungeon. I think Izanami's villain monologue captures this issue perfectly. Let's compare it with the big bads of the other modern Persona games. Have you noticed something? Persona 3 and Persona 5's villains each focus on one core concept in their evil monologues. Izanami, on the other hand, rambles about 2 things in her villain speech in a very contrived, disconnected way, just like the sudden pivot from the truth theme to the community one was. Seriously, if you examine all of the other dungeon plot lines, they're not about accepting the power of friendship, but the truth. To make matters worse, it's not even just that the bonds and the community spirit stuff just comes out of nowhere. It also begins to override the truth theme in terms of prominence. This community and friendship stuff, it's not just abrupt, it feels unearned. The main characters have no real response to most of Izanami's preaching, and unlike in Persona 5, where the whole point at that stage is that the Phantom Thieves aren't doing what the public wants, it just feels extraordinarily lackluster. Which isn't how you want the end of your big JRPG to feel. I think, ultimately, for a game that wants to make big statements about bonds and community, Persona 4 simply doesn't do the work to say any of the things it says about them. And that is why I ultimately think Persona 4 isn't a good game. Because the themes, aka the foundations of literally everything else, are clumsy. Now that I've talked about what the big issue with Persona 4 is, I'm going to break down the various aspects of the game in more detail and discuss how they contribute to, or fail to contribute to the themes, along with my subjective opinions on them. One common argument amongst the fan base is Persona 4 sucks because it's too silly, versus it's good that Persona 4 is lighthearted actually, and I firmly agree with Camp 2 here. I think it's great actually when long-running series experiment with their tone. Compare Fire Emblem to Pokemon. Intelligent systems shake things up every game, and while it doesn't always pan out, it keeps Fire Emblem feeling fresh. Meanwhile, Game Freak has changed Pokemon's formula literally twice, and therefore, after you've played enough of them, most of the games start to blend into each other. Murder mystery and slice of life are two genres that pair together very well. I love a light-hearted murder mystery. Hit me with some Midsummer Murders, Shakespeare and Hathaway, things like that. Persona 4's tone is not a problem. But, well, as you all know, I don't like this game, despite liking most of the individual ingredients that went into it. I think a lot, though definitely not all, of the people who complain about Persona 4's tone don't actually have a problem with the tone. What they really have an issue with is the game's pacing. Because yeah, it's not great. From May till November, with one exception, basically nothing of any substance happens in regards to the main plot. In fact, the gameplay is pretty much this. Someone's face appears on the Midnight Channel. The investigation team try and fail to protect them. You save them in the day and kill time with social links until the deadline date. The investigation team chat about the case and make no real progress, may hang out as a group and do some shenanigans, rinse and repeat. Then the Heaven arc starts, and everything happens at once, and it's great, don't get me wrong. The lead up to Nanoko's dungeon is some 10/10 stuff, but the slice of life elements are basically thrown out of the window at this point, especially if you're playing vanilla or didn't max Marie's social link. And, as a bit of a kicker, the second Nanako is saved, the entire mystery is solved in one conversation. Because of that, a huge chunk of the game just feels empty. The mystery being condensed into such a short amount of time would be less galling, however, if there were simply more things happening. Let's look at Recipes for Love and Murder, which is another slice of life murder mystery fusion, which in some ways is what I think Persona 4 is trying to be. The series is structured like this. There is an ongoing murder mystery that lasts the entire season. There are character subplots that last multiple episodes. Then, each individual episode also has its own slice of life plotline. Compare this to Persona 4. It has an ongoing murder mystery that lasts the whole game. It has the dungeon storylines that last for one section of the game. And credits. Unless you count the completely optional social links, that is, that have no actual effect on the overarching story. This is why Persona 4 feels so empty between the months of April to November. The slice of life fundamentally lacks substance. If you have ever been online, you've probably heard the term filler, a concept that originally came from anime. In this day and age, anime adaptations of existing manga tend to be released in spread out seasons, giving the manga time to progress and therefore more material for the anime to adapt. Back in the olden times, however, animes just kept on going. This meant that eventually they'd run out of manga to adapt, so they needed to make anime original content. However, this led to an issue. They couldn't give any character any meaningful development in case they contradicted what the source material did later. This is why most anime fillers revolve around a bunch of OCs that are dropped like hot potatoes as soon as the arc ends, because the writers cannot do anything meaningful with the main cast. In this day and age, the term filler tends to be used whenever an episode or part of a game diverges away from the main plot, which is a blatant misuse of the term. Let's look at Steven Universe. The show is mainly split between the core plot with the alien gems and slice-of-life episodes with the human residents of Beach City. Those Beach City episodes are frequently cited as filler, except that's not true. Because the characters might not develop as dramatically as they do in the gem-centric episodes, but Steven's relationships with the Beach City characters actively affect his character development, and the humans' lives change due to Steven's influence as well. Heck, even the gems get development in these so-called filler episodes. If you cut out every single Beach City episode that wasn't directly connected to the main storyline, Steven Universe would feel like half a show. Downtime and small stakes moments are a vital part of any narrative. They give the overarching plot breathing room, and are often the moment where the main cast's relationships with each other are solidified. Good slice of life might not have high stakes, or even any stakes whatsoever, but it still says something about the characters involved. The problem with a lot of the slice of life moments in Persona 4, the camping trip, beach, beauty pageant, etc., is that they say nothing. They are filler in the actual sense of the term. No meaningful development can occur in them whatsoever because all major characters' arcs are developed in their, let me say it again, completely optional social links. Let's dissect the camping trip. It does two things. It hammers down that Yosuke is a homophobic, misogynistic arsehole, which is not particularly news at this stage, and introduces a running gag that the girls can't cook. Firstly, not being able to cook in of itself isn't a meaningful character trait. Sorry, Fuga. If the scene was the moment that triggered Yukiko's realization that she's not ready to fly the coop just yet, or made her realize that independence isn't as glamorous as it seems, that would be one thing. But remember, no development outside of social links is allowed. It's just a gag, and it sucks. Then, with Yosuke, him being an arsehole here could have been actually interesting if the game had literally done anything with it. Except that's not what his social link is about. So Yosuke just remains a homophobic, misogynistic arsehole for the entire game. I'll be talking about this more later, but a loud minority of the fandom say that the fandom thieves don't feel like friends because they don't get as many slice of life scenes. I fundamentally disagree with this take. Quite frankly, I'd much rather less hangout scenes overall than a metric ton of them that are fundamentally shallow. Making nearly every character's growth dependent on optional scenes that can occur at any time and can therefore clash with the way the character is acting in the main story, Dojima, makes the non-social link slice of life moments utterly hollow. Worst of all, it actively undermines one of the core themes of the game, bonds, because these scenes did not make the characters feel closer to me. On that note, this is a good moment to segue into a problem both Persona 3 and 5 share is that they have a couple of party members that just feel irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. This is due to gameplay mechanics, specifically the need to have a party member covering each element. Persona 4 generally has a smaller cast, however, with a strict 8 members as opposed to C's/the Royal Phantom Thieves 10, and considering all the gushing I heard about the characters in Persona 4, I was expecting them all to play a satisfactory part in the game's overarching story. Lol, LMAO even. You could axe not 1, not 2, but 3 whole members of the investigation team with a minimal effect on the plot. Case in point, let's look at how the murders are finally solved. Naruto, Yosuke, and the protagonist ditch the rest of the team and figure out who the culprit is by themselves in a single conversation. Yeah. Suffice it to say, this does not help sell the major theme of bonds and community connection. The thing that sells it even less, however, is the investigation team's overall dynamic. Remember how I brought up that point earlier that Persona 4 fans think the Phantom Thieves don't feel like friends in contrast to the investigation team? I don't know what these people are smoking, and I don't want any, because the investigation team's vibes as a group are utterly rancid. Now, I am Australian. We all love some banter with our mates. If you can't casually take the piss out of your friend, they're not actually your friend. Good banter, however, has a strict rule. That is that you never, and I mean never, rib your mate over something they are actually insecure about. That's just being mean. And the investigation team are mean to each other. Yosuke and Teddy are constantly horrible towards Kanji over his queer-coded behaviour. Everyone is mean to Teddy, though to be fair, I can't blame them. Yosuke, again, has a tendency of committing microaggressions towards the girls, and therefore it's totally fine for them to be utterly dismissive of him at all times, right? This is not a friend group. Yosuke is friends with Chie. Chie is also friends with Yukiko. Kanji is friends with Naruto. Everyone is friends with Protagonist-kun. That's it. Nobody actually likes Teddy, he's tolerated at best, and Risa doesn't get to have any relationships of any substance with anyone but you. So, when during the serious moments of the game, especially near the end, where the investigation team act like their friendship is a unique, powerful thing, I can't help but arch a brow. The lack of any proper relationship building between half of these characters makes those moments feel utterly unearned. It completely undermines what's supposed to be the major theme of this game, and I shouldn't have to say why that's bad. While I dislike the investigation team as a collective, I don't necessarily dislike them all as individual characters. In fact, statistically speaking, I don't even dislike half of them. So, let's start this section off with... Makoto and Kotone have as much personality as you are going to get from a silent protagonist in a linear game. And Joker is a skeleton of 3 different characters in a trench coat. I would regard them all as more concepts of a character than an actual character itself. You, somehow, has the unlucky privilege of being boring, even by Persona protagonist standards. His dialogue options are just inconsistent and utterly sourceless, and his design isn't good enough to carry him despite that. I think the scene that really undermines him and sends him to the annals of mediocre protagonisthood, however, is his awakening. Joker and Makoto's defining moments, the thing that actually makes you want to be that dude, are the moments they get their personas. Makoto points a bloody gun at his head before smiling viciously and pulling the trigger. Joker tears off a mask in a torrent of blood while making a vow to stick to his justice even if it makes him a pariah. Even Kotone does the same thing Makoto does, even if it's hampered by a lack of a cutscene. Yu, on the other hand, shakes a gas station attendant's hand, and that's it. There's no trials or tribulations, no interesting character moments. He can summon a persona just because. It's extra galling because the way personas are gained in Persona 4 is genuinely really fascinating. But your self-insert isn't allowed to have any insecurities whatsoever, so he just gets his persona in the most unearned, deus ex machina way possible. Yu, however, does have one thing going for him, and that's his relationship with his cousin Nanako. He adopts her as a sibling after a while, despite the fact that most teenagers wouldn't want to be seen anywhere near a child that age. It's genuinely really wholesome and, gasp, is one of the very few relationships that have actual plot ramifications. So, you can get some points from that at the very least. God, Yosuke. I think Yosuke is the single most aggravating playable character in the modern Persona games and is ultimately my least favourite. Why? Because as they say, the opposite from love isn't hate, it's indifference. When Yosuke is good, he is so good. When he's bad, however, his behaviour is legitimately harmful. Firstly, I think his premise is really fun. Ostracised son of a local Junes manager who, despite his happy-go-lucky facade, is miserable in Inaba and hungers for adventure? That's a setup for some really interesting conflict, and while the game doesn't do as much of it as I'd like, I think the resolution for his arc, aka him coming to love Inaba for its people, is really good. His social link, which explores his grief after Saki's death, is also consistently excellent, and during serious plot moments, he has an insightfulness and emotional intelligence not normally shown by the bro characters, which is really refreshing. And then a comedy scene starts and he becomes an actual sexual predator. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to segue into talking about a topic most of you are probably waiting for me to discuss in more detail. Specifically, the game's humour. I don't find Persona 4 funny. At a base level, the humour is too slapsticky for my personal tastes, and that's fine. A large proportion of the jokes, however, aren't just slapsticky, but depict actual sexually predatory behaviour, with Yosuke and Teddy, but more on him later, being the main perps. I've never found the pervert archetype common in Japanese media funny, not even when I was a 13-year-old who didn't understand its troubling implications, and now that I am an almost 30-year-old woman, it legitimately horrifies me. Peeking on naked women, groping them, and coercing them into sexually charged situations, all against their will, are all things that are played for laughs in Persona 4, and I find that so disturbing. Some of this behaviour is flat out criminal, and all of it is immensely violating to be on the receiving end of. By portraying these things as being funny, ATLUS is destigmatizing this behaviour that very much should be stigmatized. Before you tell me I'm taking this too seriously, perhaps you'd have a point. If the main villain for this game wasn't a walking, talking, highly deliberate misogyny critique. Yosuke became irredeemable to me after the camping ground scene where he emotionally blackmails his female friends into wearing swimsuits for his sexual gratification. That isn't some trite but tolerable accidental pervert shit. That is a cold, calculated act he put actual thought into. He's acting like a Dachi Jr. here, and no offense, him getting pushed into the river afterwards is not actual karma, because it does not require him to address and change his behaviour. But as we all know by now, Persona 4 characters can't develop outside of their social links. While Yosuke never does anything as bad as the camping ground incident after that point, given how coldly calculating he was acting in that incident, excuses like him not knowing that the girls would have to participate in the beauty contest after he signed them up for it rang hollow, as it is established that he can be incredibly manipulative due to his sense of entitlement to his female friends' bodies. While it doesn't bother me as much as the misogyny, because speaking as someone who was a teenager during the years Persona 4 is set in, it's sadly period-typical. I can't finish your scared section without talking about his homophobia. The fact that he constantly treats Kanji like a potential predator because of his sexuality is, first of all, extremely hypocritical, and secondly, really undermines both themes of accepting the truth and friendship. Because if being your true self is going to lead to constant harassment, Kanji was right to keep his feminine side secret. And well, good friends don't make fun of other friends' deepest insecurities. Some people brush this off as internalized homophobia, since Yosuke was planned to be a romance option at one point, but I don't think that excuses it, since A, the romance was cut and is therefore non-canon, and B, just because you're working through some crap doesn't make it alright for you to be an asshole. I like Chie. Her personality is fun, and her social link is cute, if not a bit basic. I don't love Chie, however, even though I can see a universe out there where I do. Why? Because she is the first of a triad of basically irrelevant party members. Now, I think her conflict in the first arc is great. The entire secretly toxic friendship she has going on with Yukiko is so fun, from Chie's deeply repressed jealousy towards her, in conjunction with her possessiveness, to Yukiko's unspoken wish that Chie would grant her the freedom she desires, something Chie proves incapable of. Like, my god guys, the setup here is so juicy. The problem is that this isn't what Chie or Yukiko's social links are about, so at the end of Arc 1, their friendship goes back to normal and Chie's narrative relevance dies with it. It doesn't help that Chie's contributions to solving the case are also measurable. Now, she does figure out some things about the murderer's methods, specifically about the supernatural side of the case, but this isn't because she's got good media literacy skills and has the power of genre savviness on her side. No, she's literally just spitballing random ideas and is equally as surprised as everyone else when it turns out they have some substance. This just makes it feel like anyone would have come up with them eventually, meaning that, ironically enough from a character who wants to become a cop, it doesn't feel like she's actually needed to solve the case. That's not good. That's really not good. Ultimately, Chie is a one-act wonder, which is a bit sad, honestly, because like I said, she's fun. Yukiko, Chie's best friend, is the second of the ultimately irrelevant party members. Her desire to leave Inaba is covered in her social link, more on that later, but like Chie, she has no real impact on the overarching plot beyond having a connection to one of the crime scenes, which is important, but not important enough for her to deserve main character status. It doesn't help but I personally find her one of the weaker characters in terms of personality too. The way she acts in serious scenes, aka sensible and intelligent, does badly with her handling in comedic scenes, aka a bit of a dense airhead. It kind of feels like there is two Yukikos, and which one you're going to get is arbitrary and random, as opposed to her being a multifaceted individual. Before I move on, however, I need to talk about her social link in more detail, as I find it a very interesting one from a writing perspective, and it's a good opportunity to segue into something that I think affects a lot of Western critique of Persona 4 in particular, including my own. So, Yukiko's link is very controversial in the West, as ultimately, she abandons the idea of leaving Inaba in favour of running the Amage Inn to repay the parents and employees that helped raise her. This link is a perfect example of... I had a weeb phase in my teens. I know, what a surprise. And one thing I noticed in a lot of anime was the way that they handled certain topics, such as bullying, for example, didn't make sense. So, being a nerd, I wanted to figure out why. The answer was that, shocker, Japan is a different country. Their culture prioritizes different things, and while I think most morals are generally pretty universal, the nuances are very much not. I will not be going into these nuances in much detail because I am so white I could almost be a Genshin Impact character. While I like to think I stay on top of these things, as I am not Japanese and have never lived in Japan, it would be grossly insensitive of me to act like I am some sort of cultural authority. Instead, I suggest checking out LadyVirgilia's channel, as she creates a lot of videos explaining how Japan's culture and values influence the writing of the Persona series. The one thing I'll talk about here, as it's a fairly basic topic and one I have feelings about, is individualism versus collectivism. The West's culture is individualistic, where people are expected to prioritize their own goals and desires over those of others when it comes to how they live their life. Japan, meanwhile, is a collectivist country where you're expected to prioritize the thoughts and feelings of others over your own. And you know what? If COVID taught me one thing, it's that collectivism isn't wrong. Sometimes it is morally correct for you to do something you don't want to for the well-being of others. So if you're sick or have been exposed to sickness, put on that bloody mask. This is a long-winded way of me saying that I don't mind Yukiko's social link. It could have been executed better, yes, but she isn't guilt-tripped into staying at Inaba. It's just a choice she makes of her own free will, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. I love this guy. He's my man, the GOAT, the legend, and also one of the characters I'm looking forward to talking about the least. Let's start with the good things though. In terms of personality, Kanji is really fun. I love a macho guy with a hidden soft side. He also avoids the pitfall Chie and Yukiko stumbled into, since while he is mainly a comic relief character, his connection to Naruto gives him added importance in the build-up to the moment where they join the main cast. Now though, I have to address the elephant in the room. If you have ever dipped your toes into the Persona 4 fandom, you have seen Kanji and Naruto discourse. It comes in two main varieties. Are Kanji and Naruto gay/trans? Or the more sensible, are Kanji and Naruto's depictions homophobic/transphobic? I do not want to delve too deeply into this. It's a discussion that's been done to death. What I will say is this. Kanji's sexuality is deliberately ambiguous according to the creator, and that was about as good as you got in terms of gay rep back in the day. Kanji experiences homophobia from both Yosuke and Teddy, irrespective of what his sexuality actually is, which is bad since it actively undermines the story's themes. Kanji's dungeon uses homophobic imagery, but that's the point. It's supposed to be uncomfortable, as it's based off the insecurities of someone who's terrified about being perceived as feminine and/or gay. Note what I said there. Perceived as feminine. Kanji's internalized homophobia and sexuality, for all the fandom talks about it, has never felt like the point of its character to me. Just a facet of his overall issue, toxic masculinity. He presents himself as a hyper-aggressive punk due to the bullying he's received over liking sewing and cute things. This, however, brings him no happiness and has a detrimental effect on his relationships and family. In the main game, he lets go of some of the hang-ups he has regarding his potential sexuality when he decides Naruto's gender doesn't matter. And in his social link, where after the dolls he creates make a young boy happy, Kanji realizes he doesn't have to be ashamed of his hobbies even if they aren't stereotypically masculine. This is ultimately why he has such a drastic makeover in the golden epilogue, as he no longer feels the need to hide behind a wall of hypermasculinity. Admittedly, his epilogue character design does suck, but it's really not what this video is about. Oh boy. We're moving on from what's probably the best member of the investigation team to one of the worst, narratively speaking. Risa and Teddy share the dubious distinction of being characters I enjoyed up until they actually joined the party. When you first meet her, she's burnt out. Her clothes are a bit frumpy. She's a human being, not the consumable product that is the idol Rosette. Her shadow confrontation, where she acknowledges that there isn't really one singular true Risa, is such a fun take on the true theme, and would have been a really fascinating thing to explore in her social link. Except as soon as she joins the party, all of that is thrown out of the window in favour of reducing her to a hot, quirky idol that has a massive crush on you, and yes, I mean you, sweet player. Ugh, God, end me. There is a world out there where Risa is a really interesting deconstruction of both the positive and negative parts of Japan's idol culture. Instead, in this one, she's reduced to simping over the protagonist in a really pushy way I found fundamentally off-putting. And combined with the way she gets a bit catty towards Chia and Yukiko when she first develops a crush on you, it's bad. She's your eye candy girlfriend, and it sucks. Her social link is what people think Yukiko's is. Risa makes a big show of retiring from the idol industry so she can settle down with you, Japanese male playing this game, even though completely abandoning her Rosette identity flat out contradicts what she said in her dungeon about Rosette also being a real version of herself. Then she gets actively guilt-tripped by her manager into returning to the stage. Ugh. Combining that with the fact that she joins Chia and Yukiko in the irrelevant after their dungeon boss, and I think Risa is possibly the worst looking playable character in a modern Persona game. Now, after your skills section, you're probably expecting that I am about to rip this poor bear to shreds. I'm not, actually. Teddy's connections to the law, while woefully underutilised and underexplained, at least add a layer of mystery to him that keeps him feeling relevant throughout the game. And his social link is an automatic one that occurs in set places throughout the narrative. In most Persona games, that would be a bad thing, but in this one, where characters don't get arcs outside of their links, it makes it so he's the only playable character who gets a guaranteed complete character arc. And it's a cute arc too. I played with the Japanese audio, as you can probably tell by the way I am mispronouncing everything left, right and centre, and his admiration for you really bleeds through in the later parts of their link. While I wish we got more concrete answers about what the heck the deal with his shadow was and things like that, Teddy's personal growth came full circle, and I can appreciate that. Of course, as you probably already knew, this is not going to be a wholly Teddy-friendly video, because Teddy is the second perverted comic relief character in a game that needed none. Highlights of this behaviour include his attempt to molest the girls, because that's funny, guys, right? The main reason Yosuke irritates me more than Teddy, however, is because, as the Japanese audio direction makes very clear, Teddy is not a human being who should know better. This guy is legitimately a creature, and therefore should be held to creature standards, not human teenager ones. His weird obsession with the human body still sucks ass, however, and should not have been included. Ah yes, my second favourite member of the investigation team, and the only character I was looking forward to talking about less than Kanji for extremely similar reasons. Naruto is built up in the narrative very well for a late game party member. They are an active participant in the investigation team is named after, and their development isn't solely stuck in social link hell, with them warming up to the team and becoming less reserved as time goes on. All of that is completely overshadowed in fandom spaces by the gender discourse. A female character dressing up as a man to access positions denied to them because of their gender doesn't make said character trans. Take Milan, for example. Unlike Milan, however, this gimmick makes no sense in Persona 4's context, as, this isn't the 1900s, and the police would be able to gain access to information on Naruto's assigned gender with ease, when said character has also felt alienated from womanhood for as long as they remember, only relates to male characters in media, and feels viscerally uncomfortable with presenting as female, something that never changes even after they apparently accept their gender, then yeah, that all feels pretty transcoded to me. I was a tomboy who struggled with internalized misogyny, and yet never, at any point, did I want to change my gender. Naruto, meanwhile, has an entire mind palace dedicated to it, which also uses a lot of transphobic imagery, but given a lot of actual trans people have discussed the nuances of it, I'm not going to delve into it here. Yukiko says a dumb line that Naruto doesn't actually want to be a man, something Naruto agrees with, but none of their actions from that point onwards substantiate that claim. Naruto never loves being a woman. They tolerate it at best, and when combined with everything else, it really does just feel like ATLUS wrote a transmasc character without realizing transmasc people exist, and therefore Naruto's arc fails to explore either sexism or gender identity in any actual meaningful way. Don't get me wrong, like I said, I like Naruto a lot, but their gender arc is garbage. I won't be going into each of the various social link exclusive characters here. This video is long enough as is. While they are a step up from Makoto's social links, and therefore I can see why the fandom gassed them up in contrast, I found most of them to just be very average at best, with a few diamonds in the rough. I'll also save Marie for the section where I talk about the supernatural side of the murder mystery. I will, however, be talking about Dejima and Nanako. I admit, I don't really care for child characters all that much, but I think Nanako plays her part excellently. The scenes where the investigation team include her are some of the few times the team as a whole genuinely acts in an emotionally touching way that feels earned. And I think their relationship with her makes a really fun contrast with Nanako's relationship with Dejima. The group of 15 to 16-year-olds are somehow a better parental figure than you, Dejima, and I think that builds up fun character conflict. Back to Nanako though, she enables my favourite chunk of the narrative, specifically her kidnapping and the fallout of it. For once, the stakes in Persona 4 feel so real. Dejima loses his mind and almost gets himself killed. The investigation team have to lock in like never before. Your family no longer greets you at the door. This moment heralds a point of time the game gets serious, and it's great. There is something I have to complain about though while I'm still on the topic of Nanako. Specifically, her death fake out. I really don't like it at all. Her miraculous recovery from literal death for barely any explained reason feels cheap, and retroactively dampens the moral dilemma over killing Namatame or letting him walk that the investigation team were having beforehand. To make things worse, it really wasn't necessary. All what needed to happen was a doctor, or Adachi, telling the investigation team that her condition was worsening and they were worried she wasn't going to make it through the night. Same emotional impact, less cheap drama. On to Dojima. I don't like him as a person, but I think he's a good character. Speaking as someone who played Persona 5 first, He's the anti-Sojiro. He seems like a nice enough guy, if not a bit of a workaholic. But then major cracks start to appear in your relationship as the game goes on and he begins to suspect you're involved in the killings. This leads to him betraying you at the one moment you really needed his unconditional trust, which, yet again, is a really fun character moment. If you haven't done a social link, which you probably have, you've supposedly made an unbreakable vow of friendship with this guy if you rank Tenet, so Dojima point blank refusing to hear you out in that case feels kinda OOC. Another problem with him arresting you is that it also completely puts a damper on the Yu, Nanako, Dojima found family dynamic. So there's no real time for Dojima to actively repair their relationship after this stage due to his hospitalization and then the game hitting its climax. By the time Persona 4 ended, he was still on thin ice with me, which, in the Bonds game, is not good. I will admit, Persona 4 does do something none of the other modern Persona games do nearly as well. To be specific, its human villains are consistently great. Surprise! This section is going to be predominantly positive. I'll talk about them all in more detail, but Mitsuo serves his role as a red herring reasonably well. Namatame is a really fun, misguided, sympathetic villain, and Adachi is a viscerally realistic serial killer. And while they don't really contribute to the human connections theme all that much, most of them help bolster the truth theme in an interesting way, even if they're not entirely perfect. I don't have too much to say about Mitsuo. He's not the most developed of characters, but he has enough screen time for the player to figure out what makes him tick. Some of the subtleties of his backstory the Void Quest dungeon alludes to, especially the implications that Moroku genuinely wronged him at one point, something which also isn't used to get Mitsuo any sympathy points, is nice. Moving on to Mitsuo and Truth, I genuinely enjoy the way he enhances the theme. He is the first major red herring because he is lying to you. He's not the culprit, and while the investigation team figure the truth out eventually, for a moment, they buy into his hype. He is a lesson to them to not take things at face value. Moreover, he is the only character in the game to actively reject his shadow even after they're defeated, as unlike the investigation team, he cannot accept the awful truth about himself. My one problem with him is that he's as ugly as shit. His sprite is screaming, "This guy is bad news," because we all know people who don't meet conventional beauty standards are evil. Don't get me wrong, Mitsuo shouldn't be some Bishonen hottie or whatever. He should be Mishima, but worse. Just a bland-ass, milquetoast guy who's so forgettable it's a genuine shock, but also not really, that he killed the dude. Anyway, next. I really like Namatame as a character. This dude is clearly having a prolonged, god-exacerbated mental breakdown, and I love that for him. He is a perfect red herring villain. Unlike Mitsuo, who is never really going to ever be the big bad, this dude actually works as a culprit. He is the perfect embodiment of Persona 4's truth theme. His despair and desperation, due to the circumstances the investigation team first meet him in, just make him come off as delusional and dangerous instead. Which is technically true, but only half the picture. As irked as I am by the whole Nanako death cop-out, it does lead to one of the most powerful moments in the game. The investigation team is so enraged at Namatame, they lose sight of the truth. For a moment, they stop questioning everything and almost commit homicide because of it. And for once, unlike every single other bad ending in Persona, you actually need to put some thought into what you say to calm the team down. Admittedly, there is one thing I really hate about this scene, but I'll save that for when I talk about the TV world. Back to the actual point of this segment. Once everyone has taken a few deep breaths in and chilled the hell out, the whole truth finally comes out. Namatame isn't evil, he's just a deeply hurt person who's being taken advantage of due to said hurt. It's good, compelling writing. There is literally nothing I would change about him as a character. Finally, the big bad. Well, of the human antagonists anyway. Adachi is a great villain, though sometimes I think people miss the point of him. There is a subset of people who blame all of his misdeeds on misanthropy as opposed to misogyny, and I think those people need to develop their media literacy skills a bit more. Adachi is a misanthrope, yes, but the whole reason he upgraded from antisocial loner to full-blown serial killer was, surprise, misogyny! Almost like serial killers in real life, huh? In fact, Adachi is an exploration of an extremely specific type of misogyny, which I recognised the second we got his backstory due to those good old-fashioned weeb days I mentioned earlier. Yet again, throwing in a disclaimer that I'm a whitey McWhite person and should not be your main source for Japanese culture fun facts. Or not so fun in this case. So, there are very different standards for celebrities in the East versus the West. In Western culture, celebrities are hyper-visible. We know all about their dating lives, their personal drama, you name it. And more importantly, there is the expectation that they're all going to mess up one day, whether it's drinks or drugs or an affair. There is very little a celebrity can do to get actually legitimately cancelled. Japan's standards for their celebrities are very different. They're not just expected to be performers, but also perfect, marketable people. Behaviours such as drinking or smoking are a massive no-no, and most relevantly, idols are frequently banned from dating and have to jump through hoops to get married. Why? The answer is parasocialism. Idols are meant to be your dream friend, your dream girlfriend. If they're dating another horrible, stinky man, it means they can't date you, and that's unacceptable. The reason why Adachi attacks Ayumi Yamano is because, as a media personality, he felt entitled to her. The fact that, shocker, she turns out to be a human being who fell in love with the wrong guy is unacceptable to Adachi because, in his fundamentally twisted little mind, she betrayed him. Adachi is the guy who has a mental breakdown when his favourite VTuber turns out to be in a relationship. Adachi is the guy who got pissed off when Tracer Overwatch was confirmed to be a lesbian, as the fictional character would no longer f*** him. That is who Adachi is, and that is the behaviour ATLUS is criticising. And you know what? Good on them for doing so, and kudos. They do a great job at it. Adachi's behaviour is chilling because it is viscerally real. He is a gross ass creep, and that is why he is probably my favourite Persona villain. I do have a slight problem with him though, and that's his kill count. I don't like that he kills 2 people at the start of a game. I do have a slight problem with him though, and that's his kill count. I don't like that Adachi kills 2 people at the start of the game, then simply sits back and lets Namatame do all the hard work. While I think he would generally be pretty fine with letting Namatame run the show, as Adachi is very much lazy, he is also petty, immature, spiteful, willing to hurt people, and possesses a power that allows him to do so with little consequences. I think Adachi needed to commit one more murder. It would make him more intimidating as an antagonist, as honestly 2 is a pretty low kill count for a murder mystery of Persona 4's length, and could really fix Persona 4's mid-game slump. Let's move on from Adachi as a serial killer and on to how he furthers the game's themes. Like Mitsuo, I don't think he does a bad job of portraying the truth theme, even if I think there is some wasted potential here. So, first of all, I believe the fact that he's the culprit is meant to be an awful truth. He's the funny comic relief guy Adachi. He's helped you out. He hangs out with your family sometimes. And yet, he betrayed you. Except not really, as Adachi doesn't ever have a proper relationship with you/you. In the original game, he doesn't have a social link, so he's just sort of there. While in Golden, it's very clear that his link is written with the expectation that you already know what he is. It delves into his mentality, yes, but it doesn't make Adachi likeable. If anything, it actually makes him less likeable, which is good for someone who knows the twist, but does lower the impact of the big reveal for first-time players. While I'm on the topic of Adachi and the awful truth, even if him being the culprit doesn't quite manage to be one, he does also deliver one to the player. Specifically, that if they fail to stop him, the worlds will merge and Inaba will be overcome by shadows. I have no criticisms of this. It's a very natural build-up to what should have been the climax of the game. Moving on, Adachi makes up every excuse under the sun for his behaviour, and rightfully, the investigation team tell him to shut the hell up, even if their specific rebuttal falls flat for all the reasons I discussed in their section. Because for all Adachi acts like he's spouting the truth, he can't actually accept it himself. Sure, some of his misery is the fault of society, but most of his misery is caused by him being himself. Hold on, wait, you might be saying. There are a bunch of characters, well, okay, maybe just 2, that you haven't talked about yet. And you would be right. I thought it was best to discuss Izanami and Marie along with the Midnight Channel and TV world as a whole, however, considering how fundamentally tied to it they are. So, the Midnight Channel basically shows the image of someone who has been on TV because the public are interested in that person. It gives the people what they want to see. If someone has been thrown into the TV world, however, it'll display their shadow, the hidden sides of their personality they don't want anyone to see instead. It is the embodiment of Persona 4's thesis on truth. The Midnight Channel is people's tendency to use the TV and media to avoid reality, aka the truth. And the shadow selves represent the uncomfortable truths people are using clutches like the media and gossip to distract themselves from, in a visceral, over-exaggerated way deliberately designed to be as difficult to accept as possible. It's a nice, neat, thematic concept. Up until the game retcons what the Midnight Channel actually does during the very final dungeon. During the scene where the investigation team considers murking Namatame, the Midnight Channel plays and shows Namatame's shadow self. As I said before, until this point, when the Midnight Channel's footage shows a shadow self, it is depicting an exaggerated version of the truth. And considering what Namatame's shadow says during this scene, specifically that he doesn't regret saving people, which has different connotations to Namatame than it does the investigation team, the scene makes sense considering the pre-existing lore. But then, at the end of the game, Izanami is like, no, the Midnight Channel only shows what people want to see, not the truth. And y'all just wanted confirmation that Namatame was a remorseless murderer. This makes no sense. Because A, Namatame's shadow didn't need to be fake to begin with for that scene to work, and B, It alters how shadows work in a way that completely butchers the game's themes. Because if all the shadows we saw on the Midnight Channel are simply what people want to see, as opposed to the actual truth, then... Huh? Does that mean people wanted Kanji to be an effeminate gay stereotype? For Yukiko to be a man-hungry fantasy princess who wanted to get the hell out of town? No, this retcon just makes no sense and completely undermines the otherwise very powerful theme of accepting the parts of yourself you don't like if those parts aren't actually yourself. This scene just retroactively ruined most of the stuff I like about Persona 4, and it sucks. Now, there's more I could rant on about the inconsistency between shadows and shadow selves and how it's all handled, but this script is already 18 pages long, and I've got more important things to talk about, like the TV dungeons. I like the general concept of TV dungeons. Admittedly, they walked so Persona 5's palaces could run. The lack of cognitions, non-sentient reflections of the people the palace ruler / dungeon owner knows in real life, for those who haven't played Persona 5, kind of sucks. But the palaces wouldn't exist without TV dungeons in the first place, so I have to give them kudos for that alone. With the exception of Naruto's dungeon, for reasons I mentioned in the characters section, I like the concepts of the individual TV dungeons too. Yukiko's is a good metaphor, Mitsuo's suits his character, Adachi's is a reflection of his twisted mind, etc, etc. More importantly, I actually like both Rise and Kanji's. These are the two I see the most criticisms of in the corners of the fanbase I hang out in, and I sort of disagree with them. Yes, it is extremely uncomfortable having a striptease based off a 15-year-old girl, but that's the point. Rise's TV dungeon is a commentary on how often underage idols are reduced to mere products for consumption and gratification. You're supposed to go out of it thinking, damn, we need to treat these people differently. Kanji's, again, is uncomfortable, but in a deliberate way. His shadow is a walking gay stereotype because Kanji is afraid that's what he is. In terms of gameplay, however, oof. Oof. I think if people played this game after vanilla Persona 3 or Fez, most of them would think it's an improvement for the existence of direct commands alone. I'm sorry, I know that there are a lot of tactics fans on YouTube, but outside of the hardcore Fez fanbase, which is not actually the majority of players, people simply don't like it. Seriously, I think if you spend a lot of time in fandom spaces, God knows I've fallen into this mind trap myself, you lose touch on what casual players, aka most players, actually think about things. Except, Fez stands rejoice, I am not most people, and I think Persona 4's combat system is the worst of all the modern games. Why? First of all is the lack of elements. Persona 4 combined Persona 3's 3 physical elements into one, and as a result, the gameplay feels so much shallower. The party members also feel a lot less distinct from each other than usual because of it. I also think that the difficulty curve of the game sucks ass. Why are there random mob encounters that resist almighty damage, aka all-out attacks, aka the thing you're meant to do to quickly defeat enemies in the second dungeon? Alright, deep breaths in, deep breaths out. Whew. To make matters worse, I think the layouts of the TV dungeons suck as well. They're basically an endless corridor simulator with a really awkward camera angle, and the different visuals slapped over each one is not enough to make them interesting. They make me want to chew off my arm in a way that Tartarus never did. Unlike Tartarus, ATLUS at least tried to add some puzzle elements to the TV dungeons to make them more interesting. And I wish they didn't, because they all suck. There's backtracking, forced camera angle changes, all these other small gimmicky things which don't enhance the narrative of the dungeons at all, but do make them longer and more tedious to go through. Now, finally, this complaint is completely subjective and is not an indicator of the game's quality in any way. But I also really hate all the dungeon and battle themes. The music is not bad. I think Persona 4's overall themes are consistently excellent, so I know the composers can definitely compose, but for some reason, all of the TV World associated tracks just do not hit for me. So ultimately, the TV dungeons have a good story, but boy howdy the gameplay is rough. So, Persona 4's mythos is based around Japanese legends, which I know jack all about. So, who knows? Maybe the Sagiris are Izanami's minions in Japanese myths, and therefore to Japanese players, it was obvious she was going to appear the second they popped up. Admittedly, a cursory glance at the Megami Tensei wiki doesn't make that seem like the case, but like I said, I don't really know, so take that into account for this section. I fully acknowledge that there is a chance I'm missing something here. The first deity that appears is Kuni no Sagiri, who appears when Namatame is possessed by a ton of lesser shadows. While I think he's a bit underdeveloped and underexplained, he does fulfill the narrative and gameplay role he needs to. He serves as a decoy final boss, and is the last major foe you fight on the bad endings. He also serves as a tiny bit of foreshadowing of Namatame's role in the overarching lore, which, well, as far as I'm aware, that's as good as the foreshadowing gets for pretty much anything involving Izanami. That sentence is also foreshadowing. The next divine entity that appears is Ameno Sagiri. As with Kunino Sagiri before it, it appears after Adachi is defeated, possessing him. I have similar feelings to it as I do Kunino Sagiri. It does kinda come out of nowhere again, however, I'm not too bothered by that. He is the ultimate shadow spawning all of the evil fog and obscuring the truth, and therefore he makes a logical final boss. And, on the normal route of the game, aka the route most players are probably getting if they don't look up a walkthrough or know about Izanami in advance, he is the final boss. In the true ending, however, the big bad is Izanami, who is my single least favourite divine entity in the entire franchise. Boy howdy, I thought Persona 5's final boss was poorly implemented and stuck out like a sore thumb. But holy shit, they looked like peak writing when compared to Izanami. The first reason I hate Izanami is because her entire purpose is to answer a question that doesn't need answering. There is this thing called suspension of disbelief. To paraphrase it, if something is fundamental to the workings of a story, people are happy to just accept it as fact, even if it's completely unrealistic. For example, in Persona 3, it's never explained how the Kirijo group discovered shadows, or how they have their technology to build actual functioning robots in the 1990s. And the thing is, Persona 3 doesn't need to answer these things. The Kirijo group discovers shadows because it makes the plot work, and there are robots because robots are cool. Back to Persona 4. I don't care why Adachi, Namatame, and you have the ability to chuck people into the TV world. It's irrelevant to every single emotional beat in the story. The investigation team aren't spending chunks of their time pondering how the heck they got into the TV world in the first place, because in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't actually matter. Secondly, even discovering Izanami to begin with requires you to actively disobey what the game tells you to do. This would be one thing if it had been established that the game's commands are misleading. But it isn't. There's not even any extra prompting after you've visited all your confidants that you might have missed something. And considering that A, there is literally one scene in the entire game that actively foreshadows Izanami's existence, and B, how Adachi got powers to begin with doesn't matter, the whole situation feels unintuitive and contrived. Combined with the massive retcons she makes to the lore which undermine the theme of truth, the game would be actively better if she didn't exist, and Amino Siguri got a little bit of extra exposition time. I decided to talk about Marie and her associated dungeon separately from the rest of the TV world stuff because she was added to the golden release, and therefore there's a degree of separation between her and the rest of the plot. Now, as a character, I don't like Marie at all. The underwhelming poems you can't skip through are just tedious, and I really hate her extremely unnatural speech patterns and behaviours. She doesn't act like an actual human being, like, at all, and it would be one thing if that was deliberate, but, well, I don't think it is. I do like her social link, however, and giving her a scene with each member of the investigation team makes the build-up to the events of the Hollow Forest, Marie's pseudo-TV dungeon, flow very naturally. Speaking of the Hollow Forest, it's actually one of my favourite parts of the game. The emotional beats of this arc, for once, worked. Despite my general disdain of her character, Marie's pain in this dungeon is both palpable and gut-wrenching. The investigation team's camaraderie and determination to save her actually feels natural for once, as while the only one who's close to Marie is you, they all know her, and unlike with each other, they don't constantly get into silly spats with Marie. This is the only time in the game where the bonds theme actually resonated with me. It also handles the truth theme in a really interesting way as well, because the investigation team refuse to accept the truth that Marie needs to die for Inaba to be safe, and their determination actively changes the facts. The Hollow Forest is also the only TV dungeon I find interesting from a gameplay point of view. The loss of your items and constant halving of your SP forces you to try out techniques and strategies that you would normally never touch with a 10-foot pole, which makes for a refreshing change of pace. Generally, I think a lot of the people who complain about this dungeon don't actually enjoy strategy in their strategy games. It's not hard, it just requires you to think. While this is probably one of the most positive sections of this video so far, I need to talk about the elephant in the room. Specifically, the common fandom complaint that Marie and the Hollow Forest feel shoehorned in. And yeah, even though Golden was the first version of Persona 4 I played, I can definitely sympathise with that point of view. Now, I don't think she's as jarring as other ATLUS re-release girls, but I can see why people found her being the first major character you talk to in Inaba off-putting, along with her presence in the Velvet Room. And I also think tying Marie directly to Izanami, instead of just keeping her as a backup Sigiri, wasn't ATLUS's brightest idea. And that's about all I have to say for this section of the video. The last thing I want to talk about during this section deep diving into Persona 4 is the setting of Inaba. Now, LadyVirgilia has a video discussing the specific cultural nuances of the town, which I'd recommend checking out. But, well, while there is a bit more to it, I think the general premise of Inaba is pretty universal. It's a rural town that is slowly dying due to capitalism and urbanisation. I kind of feel the same way towards it as I do most things I feel more positively about in Persona 4. I don't think Inaba is a bad setting, but I do think it falls woefully short of its full potential. In general, small towns are good settings for murder mysteries. Remember, I'm a Midsummer Murders fan. They're often very cliquey, with gossip that spreads like water and a hostility towards outsiders that leads to some fun conflict. And I think Persona 4 leans into that fairly well. The problem with gossip is one of the major themes of the game, and you and Yosuke both get some flack for being from the city. The problem is that the fear-mongering and the rejection of outsiders, aka the future, is only half of what the game wants to use Inaba for. It also wants you to fall in love with the village, warts and all, and I just didn't. While Inaba shows the bad sides of living in a small town fairly well, it never really shows the good sides, at least not to the same extent. Some of this is due to the technological limitations of the time. One advantage real-life rural communities have going for them is that they're often filled with natural beauty, and, well, it was hard to make 3D models pretty in games in that era. Another problem is that you spend a lot of time goofing off in Inaba due to those pacing issues I harped on about earlier, but that time feels bad as there's simply not a lot of compelling things to do, which puts me off the setting in general. The main time killer you have are social links, and when you combine the excessive amount of god-awful hangout visits with the fact that they're pretty mediocre in general, it doesn't earn Inaba any favours. To make matters worse, unlike in Persona 3, dungeon crawling devours your day and night slots, making it extra hard to get to the meat in most of the links. This matter is not helped by the fact that you can barely progress any of them during rainy weather. It rains in Inaba all the time. So, let's look at all the other things you can kill your free time with. There's bug catching and fishing, two mini-games I generally enjoy, but lack depth and complexity. Then there's part-time jobs, which are boring-ass cutscenes, most of which are spent in your room. There's a bit more meat on the bone in Golden, where you go on day trips to Okina City, which isn't actually Inaba, and motorbike rides, which do show you more of the town surroundings, which is nice, but are also really hampered due to the whole PS2 era 3D models thing. I think this really sucks, because it's so important to Persona 4's story that you care about this place. And it's hard to when you spend most of your time being bored. Sure, you could argue that rural towns are meant to be boring. That's realistic. But I would counter-argue that firstly, I care more about Persona 4 being an enjoyable piece of media than I do a realistic one. And secondly, it didn't have to be this way. Imagine if motorbike riding wasn't just a cutscene, but involved you actually exploring the world. Imagine if bug catching and fishing functioned more like they did in Animal Crossing, with their own special collectopedias. Imagine if there was a photo mechanic like in Pokemon Sun and Moon. That would give Inaba a charm that you simply couldn't have in a more urban Persona game. The other big problem with Inaba is that I simply did not feel that sense of community ATLUS clearly wanted to capture with it. At least, not in the positive sense. A lot of the friendlier, non-socialic NPCs feel really disconnected from each other. Like, there's that nice lady that gives you seeds, but she's just giving you seeds, not Chia or Yosuke or bloody Adachi. I think that this is the massive flaw of the social link mechanic in a game like this. Joker, having a limited collection of people he's as thick as thieves with, works for Persona 5, as it's a major theme of that game that he is rejected by society. You're only making pals with like 18 to 20 people, while everyone else is a faceless, spriteless NPC. Doesn't make me feel like Inaba is connected as a society, just that Yu is good at making friends, which he could have made anywhere. Imagine if every single social link was like Ko and Daisuke's, where it might have 1 star, but the supporting cast aren't just faceless NPCs. Imagine if the other members in Drama Club were actual friends with Yu, instead of vaguely annoying bit characters who exist solely to further Yui's character arc. Imagine not just seeing Naoki, but getting to know his mother and father too. The final big thing I want to talk about are side quests. In the Fox social link, you have to complete a series of them. They normally involve helping citizens of Inaba and are great. It's one of the few moments that gives Inaba a sense of real community. And then the rest of the side quests are not just fetch quests, but arbitrary and meaningless fetch quests that require you to backtrack and grind in dungeons you have already completed. In the modern Persona game with the worst dungeon crawling loop. Yeah. What a waste. What an absolute waste. ATLUS was so close to doing what they needed to do to give Inaba that sense of community it sorely needs. And this is a good moment to segue to... I'm glad you asked. It's because the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 DLC, which is a whole game in of itself, is massively focused on the theme of community, which is actively reinforced by the narrative and, more importantly, the core gameplay. In this way, it is the exact game Persona 4 wants to be. You see, Torna the Golden Country features this mechanic called community. To paraphrase the Xenoblade wiki, whenever you either talk to an NPC or complete a quest for them, they become supporters of the party, which raises the level of your community. To progress through the game, you must increase this community level to certain ranks. And when I say complete a quest, I don't just mean tossing the NPC an item and calling it a day. No. Quests in Torna involve rescuing someone's loved ones from danger, helping them out of debt, mending people's relationships, you name it. The characters don't just have relationships with the player, but in-depth ones with each other. Because of this, by the time the game reaches its climax, I care about the people of Torna, not just the main party. I feel the same way Laura, the main character, feels about her homeland. It's a place I cherish and want to protect. Imagine if Persona 4 was like this. If every NPC had a name and face, and in-depth relationships with both you and each other. If to progress through the game, instead of having to twiddle your thumbs until an arbitrary date happens, you were rewarded with more plot by getting out there and making your community a better place. Because in that world, while Persona 4 would still have flaws, it would also be a good game. I have spent most of this video ripping apart Persona 4, but now it's time to do the opposite. Because there are reasons Persona 4 is bad, and I think a lot of them are not due to incompetence on ATLUS's side. I think you cannot properly analyze any piece of media without considering the context it was made in. Values dissonance is a perfect example of this, for one. I think any critical analysis of the modern Persona games that fails to account for the fact that they are Japanese games dissecting Japanese social issues is an inherently flawed one. On the topic of context, another thing I think is vital for good game analysis, as it affects the final product so much, is understanding the conditions a game was made in. Because a big studio game isn't like a passion project. It needs to appeal to investors and account for things like budgets and deadlines. This is to say, Persona 4 released a mere 2 years after Persona 3. For context, according to Hoshino, Persona 5 took 5 years to develop, over double the amount of dev time. This is entirely speculation on my part, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised if, upon seeing Persona 3's good reviews, those investors I mentioned earlier demanded ATLUS cash in on Persona 3's hype and release what is essentially, gameplay-wise, Persona 3 2 as soon as possible. Like, no wonder Persona 4's gameplay systems are weak from a ludonarrative perspective compared to Persona 3's. It would not surprise me if ATLUS was required to reuse the calendar/dungeon/social link systems, either due to executive meddling or a simple lack of time to make anything else. Seriously, they needed to plan a scenario, create the characters and setting, model those characters and setting, animate those characters and setting, write the script, hire voice actors, record the script, create music, create sound effects, storyboard and produce the animated cutscenes, bug test and bug fix it, localize it, create the cartridges, etc., etc., etc. in 2 years. Yeah, you can probably see why Persona 4 isn't as good as it theoretically could have been. The other thing I want to talk about is the year Persona 4 released in, specifically 2008. While Kanji and Naoto are both pretty mediocre to outright harmful in terms of queer representation by today's standards, and to be blunt, Naoto has never been good queer representation. If you were a kid, or not even born then, you probably don't realise how homophobic everything was during the early 2000s. By today's standards, especially considering Japan tends to lag a bit behind the West when it comes to LGBT+ rights, Kanji was a legitimately progressive character for the mere act of the developers even hinting that he might not be straight. To be blunt, I genuinely think that most things that have supposedly dated like spoiled milk, such as the consistent portrayal of sexual harassment as a thing that's funny in Persona 4, were actually just rotten to begin with. Still, considering the Yosuke romance route got as far into development as it did before being cut, I would not be surprised if ATLUS genuinely wanted to make the game gayer, but was censored at the last minute, and therefore I want to commend them for at least trying. Now, there are situations where no representation is better than flawed representation, but I don't think Persona 4 is that. As you can probably tell if you've watched the video this far, I kinda hate a lot of Persona 4. Remember what I said earlier, however. The opposite of love isn't hate, but indifference. Because Persona 4 can be good. There are moments of the game I genuinely enjoyed, and that's probably half the reason it irritates me as much as it does. Because if it was flat out garbage, I wouldn't have any reason to care about it. If it was simply a mediocre game that said nothing interesting, but committed no egregious sins either, I wouldn't have any reason to care about it as well. But I do care about Persona 4. Behind the messy themes and poor pacing and questionable humour, there is something that, in a different world, could have been amazing. And I'm actually planning on talking about that next. This video has been long enough, however, so if you're interested in seeing reconstructing Persona 4, subscribe! And like and comment too, as this is a YouTube video and therefore I'm contractually obliged to say that. Later!